Benzaguru Pema Siddhi Hung Hong Ahung Benzaguru Pema Siddhi Hung Hong Ahung Benzaguru Pema Siddhi Hung. Hello everyone and welcome to my Sunday Dharma talk here at Deer Park at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon, second lifetime. This is the 30th Sutta in our ongoing series of 34 suttas on the 34 suttas of the Digha Nikaya, the first book of the Sutta Pitaka. It's a fairly lengthy sutta, about 12 pages, and so I was expecting to be able to generate a fair amount of material about it, but alas, 'twas not to be. Walsh talks about this as being the least inspiring sutta in the Digha Nikaya. I hope I've managed to find something of interest in it, but the talk will take probably about 30 minutes. And this is one of those suttas where and of course ask your questions as they occur to you, rather than waiting till the end. This is one of those suttas which has no story. The Buddha simply gives a sermon. There's no explanation of the situation. They're located in the Jetavana Monastery in Anatta Pendika's Park, Savatthi, in Kosala, the country of Kosala. Beyond that, we have no particular information. So, let's get to it. And you might want to open your browser just to have it in readiness, because at one point there's a long table which I'm not able to reproduce here, and I'll refer you to the URL if you want to follow along. We've discussed the 32 marks of a great man and the 7 treasures of a righteous emperor in Sutta 14. So, in fact, those of you who have attended my talk on Sutta 14 are going to find that this material is familiar. So here in Sutta 30 we encounter them again. So as I said, some of today's talk may be familiar to those who attended my talk on Sutta 14. The marks of a great man are perhaps paradoxically observable shortly after birth, in the first week of life, in the case of Gautama. If all the marks or signs are present, marks, signs, or characteristics, you could translate the Pali word any of those ways. If they're all present, they indicate that the infant will grow up to be either a righteous emperor who governs in accordance with Dharma, or a Buddha who achieves enlightenment and teaches Dharma. If he becomes an emperor, he will be possessed of the 4 great treasures: the wheel treasure, elephant treasure, horse treasure, jewel treasure, woman treasure, householder treasure, and the counselor treasure. You may remember these from before. The 7 treasures represent 7 essential qualities of a righteous emperor, and I'm going to summarize them and give what they correspond to on a slightly higher level of abstraction than I did in the talk on the 14th Sutta. So the wheel treasure corresponds to the power of truth and the Dharma itself. The elephant treasure corresponds to virtue or morality. The horse treasure corresponds to dispassion, renunciation, detachment. The jewel treasure corresponds to omniscience and perhaps also luck. The woman treasure, ecstasy or bliss, of course. The householder treasure, wisdom or skill, and the counselor treasure, omnipotence. And if you've seen the movie Kundun, about the life of the Dalai Lama, you may remember when he was enthroned, there was these symbolic representations of these treasures were brought to him for his blessing as part of the ordination procedure, or I guess coronation procedure technically. And that's what these things were. Those were the 7 treasures of a righteous monarch, or as I'm translating it, emperor. However, a righteous emperor has conquered, not by force of arms, but by the power of truth, and he rules his empire based on justice and law. A Buddha, the Sutta says, draws back the veil from the world, implying that the world is veiled or obscured from sight. So always remember these little details in the phraseology. That gives valuable insights into the worldview that we're trying to learn and understand. So the world is veiled and obscured from sight. The world that we perceive is not reality. It is a false front, or as we might say today, virtual. Commentators endlessly emphasize how odd the 32 marks of a great man are, but most of them are not hard to imagine. The tradition says that the Buddha was flat-footed with prominent heels and ankles, long fingers and toes, soft and tender hands and feet with a bit of a web between the fingers and toes, shapely and powerful legs, long arms, a clear golden complexion, delicate and smooth skin, distinct curly bluish-black body hairs, an erect posture. Some versions say his limbs were straight, so his spine was straight, his limbs were straight. Well-rounded limbs, shoulders, and trunk, that's referring to the musculature, of course. The Indian male ideal is very, very rounded, very voluptuous. A powerful rounded chest, a perfect sense of taste, interestingly. Powerful jaws, 40 even, closely spaced white teeth, a beautiful voice, deep blue eyes, long eyelashes, a mole with fine white hairs between his eyes, and a large cranium. This really tells us little about the actual physical appearance of the Buddha, but Rhys Davids has suggested that the mole between the eyebrows and the large cranium may represent actual physical idiosyncrasies of the historical Buddha. You will notice that this sutta, like many others, is written in both prose and verse. Each verse section is presented as a summary of the prose section that precedes it, but the prose section could equally be viewed as a commentary. This is true of all the suttas, but it's prominent, very prominent in this sutta, so I chose to just raise this issue in the context of this sutta. Verse has the merit of being more easily memorized than prose. Thus, the question arises, which came first, the prose or the verse? According to the Wikipedia, quote, the earliest extant forms of Buddhist discourse appear in verse, unquote. Linguistic analyses also suggest that the verse has been less edited than the prose, which is hardly surprising. Hajime Nakamura states that the verse sections predate the prose sections, and he's a scholar I have particular respect for. Similarly, the verse sections of the Jatakas are canonical, but the prose sections are not. Pandi, on the other hand, says that whereas, quote, verse is a greater conserving medium and in oral transmission likely to be more conservative than prose, unquote, quoting again, where prose and verse occur together, it is impossible to say in general whether the one or the other is older, unquote, and rejects drawing any conclusions regarding stratification based on whether the text is in verse or prose. That's in Studies in the Origin of Buddhism, page 50. So we can pay a little more attention, if we're reading the text, pay a little more attention to the verse as being a possibly more conservative version or older version of the underlying idea than the prose, but we shouldn't overemphasize that aspect. Pandi's caution seems to be supported, at least in the context of this sutta, by Walsh's note that the meters of the verses in this sutta indicate that they are of late date, so there you go. However, as I have observed before, a late date of composition neither proves that the constituent material is also late or that it is logically or philosophically illegitimate. The qualities and characteristics of a future Buddha are, like everything else, the result of karma. Each of these characteristics seems to symbolize a noble quality earned in former lives. Thus, this theory of the 32 marks of a great man is really a codification of the general theory of karma, identifying the cause of each characteristic and its effects in the present life, which are comparable both for emperors and for Buddhas. There is also a Mahayana Sutra called the Karma Sutra, and in the version of this talk, which will appear in my blog, I've given a link. There's a hyperlink, a text link on the words Karma Sutra. You can link to that Mahayana Sutra and take a look at it if you're so inclined. The Karma Sutra compiles a similar list of karmic causes and effects. So once again, we're showing the deep correspondence and similarity between Hinayana and Mahayana, between Pali texts and Mahayana in particular. The Sutta presents this list as a sort of a secret, or at least an unknown teaching, despite the Buddha's insistence elsewhere that he makes no distinction between esoteric and exoteric. Now, as you well, I'm sure you will know, as if you have read the text, you will remember a very complicated list of the marks, the past life quality or characteristic of the Buddha in his past life. Of course, not a Buddha then. Which he sowed then, and then the effect in his life as a bodhisattva and a Buddha, including the physical mark and also the karma to which it corresponds. I have simplified that for you by making a table of the 32 marks of a great man and the corresponding karmic qualities, a table which is impossible to reproduce in this talk or in the note card. So I'm going to give you the link to the talk, which posted automatically at 5 o'clock. And if you would like to follow me along, I'm just going to go quickly through the table, and so we can see the correspondence between these things. Rhys Davids makes a big deal, and actually so does Walsh, about how incomprehensible these correspondences are. Actually, if you look at them one by one, they're not that incomprehensible. For example, the first one, the feet with the level tread. The cause of this was meritorious deeds in a past life, and the effect in this life is that he cannot be impeded. So you can see the symbolic association of walking with a level tread and being unimpeded, and then working backwards from that to meritorious deeds as the cause. So I'm not going to go into a detailed explanation of these things, but I am going to go through them very quickly. So the second characteristic is the wheels with 1,000 spokes and the soles. That was caused by providing happiness for people, or providing for the happiness of people, and in this life it gives the Buddha a large retinue. Third characteristic, projecting heels. In the previous life he avoided killing, in this life he has longevity, and the same for long fingers and toes. Soft and tender hands and feet, and also hands and feet that are webbed. In the past life it was sympathy or popularity, and in this life people are well disposed to him. The high raised ankles, and here it's the emphasis is on the highness, the elevation. The high raised ankles, in the previous life he dispensed welfare, and in this life he's the chief of all. This is, of course, as a monarch or as a Buddha, depending on which path one chooses. Interestingly, they don't determine which path one will choose. So there is still the principle of volition operating here inside the karmic causal structure. Legs like an antelope's. In the previous life, skillfulness, and in the present life acquires things he needs. Can touch and rub his knees with either hand. In previous life he was considerate, in this life he's wealthy and virtuous. Male organs enclosed in a sheath. In previous life reunites families, and in this life appears to mean a large progeny. Could also be interpreted as a large military, but I think primarily what he's talking about is his descendants, who will all be, of course, royal, and so he'll have lots of progeny to carry on the lineage, the dynasty. Bright golden complexion, which we've heard about before in the Pali Canon in the context both of meditation and in the context of death as a positive quality. In the previous life, avoiding anger and being generous. And in this life he receives fine stuff. Smooth, delicate skin. In previous life he was ethical and consulted with Brahmins and ascetics about what was righteous, and in this life he has wisdom. The separate body hairs. In the previous life he has truthfulness. He was truthful, and in this life he obtains the obedience of others. Next one, the 14th, the curly, blue-black, upwardly growing body hairs. And again, the upwardness of it is what's important. In the previous life, he dispenses dharma, meaning perhaps that he was just. And in this life, he again is the chief of all, acquires supreme success. The straight body. He avoids killing in a previous life, and in this life, as a consequence, he has longevity. In the 7 convex surfaces, he gives fine food in the previous life, and in this life he receives fine food and drink. The front part of his body is like a lion's. In the previous life he desired the welfare of people, and in this life he experiences success. No hollow between the shoulders, same thing. Proportioned like a banyan tree. In the previous life he was considerate. In this life he's wealthy and virtuous. The evenly rounded chest. In the previous life he sought the welfare of people, and in this life he experienced success. Perfect sense of taste. In the previous life he practiced harmlessness. In this life he suffers little and has good digestion. Jaws like a lion's. Previous life he avoids idle chatter, and in this life he cannot be overcome. The 40 teeth. He avoids slander in a previous life, and in this life people are unified around him. Canine teeth very bright. In a previous life he practiced right livelihood. In this life he is pure. He had a very long tongue. And also Brahma-like melodious or bird-like speech. In the previous life he avoided harsh speech, and in this life he is persuasive. Deep blue eyes. In the previous life he was straightforward and kind. In this life he experienced popularity. The cow-like eyelashes. In previous life he avoided harsh speech, and in this life he's persuasive. The white hairs between the eyebrows. In previous life he is truthful. In this life he experiences the obedience of others. And finally, the head like a royal turban. In previous life he exhibited leadership qualities, and in this life he experiences loyalty. So that's the list. So you can see there is a logic to it. This analysis shows that at the time of the Buddha there was a divinatory science of physiognomy in which the signs of past karma could be read in the body of the infant, and so inferences made about their future destiny. Such a science is implied by the repeated reference to, quote, those who read the marks and signs, experts in such lore, unquote. This also implies that karma determines not just the experiences of life and psychological tendencies, but also one's physical genetic inheritance. From the modern secular perspective, genetic outcomes are generally regarded as the result of random chance, but the concept of randomness is not really emphasized in Buddhism, which is based on dependent origination and karma. Everything affects everything else, effects, and is the effect of everything else. There is room for volition in Buddhism, and there is room for an element of non-karmic causal influence. There is a passage in the Pali Canon which gives a slight opening to that. Nonetheless, the emphasis on karma is very strong, and we live in a world which is largely behaves in accordance with the principle of law of the cause and effect, which is, of course, there is no effect without a cause, there is no cause without an effect, and causes and effects are of similar type. Therefore, mental causes produce mental effects, physical causes produce physical effects, for example. Therefore, there are no coincidences. This structure provides a template that you can use to analyze your own karmic inheritance by identifying your best and worst features in this life, not necessarily only physical features, which in turn provides a guide as to how to overcome this negative karma through practice, so you can create a personalized practice regimen based on that kind of analysis, which I'll leave to you as an exercise for you to complete privately. These qualities also provide a checklist of the qualities that must be cultivated in order to become a Buddha. Ethics are strongly emphasized. The list also provides an unusual view of the 5 precepts, the Pali term pansil. We've discussed these in previous talks, in which each of the precepts is complemented by a positive action too, not just an avoidance, showing that the Buddha in past lives did not merely abstain from negative karma, but also cultivated positive karma. And you see this in the Mahayana, then it develops the positive qualities much more thoroughly than in the Pali Canon, which tends to focus on abstinence. So, for example, taking life was the negative karma to be avoided. Compassion is the positive karma to be cultivated, and the karmic effect is longevity. Stealing is the negative karma to be avoided. Generosity is the positive karma to be cultivated, and the karmic effect is a good disposition towards one by others. And finally, wrongful speech, which appears in several varieties of which appear in this list of 32 characteristics of the Buddha, including lying, idle chatter, gossip, and harshness, which are the negative things to be avoided, and the positive karmas are, of course, truthfulness, speaking at the right time, peacemaking, and agreeableness. And this results in obedience by others, not being able to be overcome, unity of the people, and persuasiveness. Perhaps surprisingly, sensuality and alcohol are not emphasized in this important list of the attributes of a Buddha. We also see traces of the Noble Eightfold Path, especially right speech, action, and livelihood. There are a few points of interest in this list of karmic qualities. First, in connection with the wheel-spoked souls of a Buddha, the text states that the Buddha's retinue, or sangha, includes, in addition to male and female monastics and lay followers or householders, devas, asuras, nagas, and gandhabas, that is, non-human beings. We touched on this a little bit in previous talks in connection with devas, because the stock phrase of the Tathagata is that he is a teacher of humans and devas. Devas are, of course, the shining beings that we have discussed. Asuras, however, which we've also discussed, are notoriously evil beings, even demonic, generally translated anti-gods. But here the Sutta implies that there are asuras who are also Buddhist, which is very interesting. And we've seen a hint of this before when the devas and asuras congregate together to honor the Buddha. So perhaps the asuras are somewhat more complex than we've hitherto given them credit for being. Nagas are also morally ambiguous creatures. Nagas are snake or dragon beings, especially cobras with one or many heads, that dwell in lakes, oceans, or underground streams and caverns, as well as on the human inhabited earth. They are also associated with treasure and hidden esoteric writings of great importance called termas, the literally hidden treasures, which figure very importantly in Tibetan Buddhism. The Nagas are also able to appear as human beings, apparently at will. There is a story of a Naga who wished to ordain as a Buddhist monk. So Nagas include Buddhists clearly, and apparently, according to the Pali text, they are as real as human beings are. The Nagas serve Virupaksa, the guardian of the West in the realm of the 4 great kings. That is, of course, the realm immediately above our own. They protect the devas of the realm of the 33 gods from the anti-gods and act as messengers between the 33 gods and the realm of the 4 great kings, which is charged with monitoring humanity. Contrary to the defamatory attacks by British conspiracy theorist and public speaker David Icke, the Nagas, or reptilians in Icke's jargon, are not unrelentingly wicked. The Naga Muchalinda even protected the Buddha from a great storm for 7 days, 4 weeks after his enlightenment, by covering his head with his hood. Sariputta and Moggallana, the 2 chief disciples of the Buddha, are called Mahanagas, literally great snakes or great Nagas. Nagas also appear commonly in the names of great Buddhist philosophers. For example, Dignaga, the Indian Buddhist logician, Nagasena, who compiled the questions of King Milinda, and the great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna. The Vajrayana and Mahasiddha traditions include esoteric texts that are associated with Nagas. The Prajna Paramita is traditionally held to have been revealed to Nagarjuna by a Naga. Nagarjuna, widely regarded as the greatest Buddhist philosopher of all time. A Gandhava, Sanskrit word is Gandharva, is the lowest ranking deva in Buddhist cosmology. They are subject to Dhritarashtra, the guardian of the East in the realm of the four great kings. Those who practice only elementary ethics are reborn here. Gandhavas are known as musicians. Aerial spirits connected with trees and flowers, they dwell in the sense of bark, sap, and blossom. We met a Gandhava in a previous sutta in connection with the rebirth of the king of Magadha, Bimbisara. Incidentally, this is not a very impressive rebirth, indicating that Bimbisara was not that great a king, despite being a disciple of the Buddha and a stream enterer. The sutta also reveals that the Buddha, despite his poverty, was still able to enjoy a good meal. I've mentioned this point before in the context of discussing the Buddha's liberality in his conduct with respect to women, including prostitutes, and the accusations of laxness that the group of 5, Devadatta and others, leveled against him during the course of his career. The sutta also alludes to the 7 treasures of a Buddha: faith, morality, moral shame, moral dread, learning, renunciation, and wisdom. And we also learn 4 ways to be loved: be generous, use pleasing speech, engage in beneficial conduct, and remain impartial. Finally, this is the only sutta in the Digha Nikaya that has no ending. It just stops. Therefore will I. Just stop. And that concludes the talk. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Before we conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings, does anyone have any questions about anything we've been discussing? Next week we'll be doing the 31st Sutta, the Sigalaka Sutta, advice to lay people. Simply, Sigalaka is the name of a person too, so it means to Sigalaka, and it's the Buddha's advice to lay people. So that will be the 31st out of 34 talks. Before we conclude, any questions, comments, discussion? Okay, I'm going back to Zhangzhung. If anyone's interested in joining me in the circle, you're welcome to do so. So let's conclude with the dedication of merit. Whatever understanding, whatever positive force has come from this, may it go deeper and deeper and act as a cause to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is my pleasure and privilege. I will return next Sunday at 2 o'clock. Namaskar.